Well, here we are again. The thing most on my mind at the moment, I have this odd habit of writing about werewolves. I don't know quite why. It's not something that I didn't set out and try and look into the whole history of werewolves. I've just always found them entirely fascinating and very, very interesting. So I tend to write about them. I'm not good at it. I know that I'm not good at it because I don't necessarily respect the mythology, but, that's why I write fantasy. I will read to you tonight. It's the story I will read to you is one of the more fantastic stories that I've ever written, in the sense that it's definitely fantasy and not anything else, which works for me. I don't have to try and say, oh, it's something else. It's just fantasy. I hope you all stay warm this weekend. In Colorado, we're expecting many, many feet of snow, apparently. So I'm going to propose a couple of questions. I put them into the chat. What do we know about cultures based on their depictions of werewolves? I think that's an interesting question. And then the other thing that I like to think about is, how does our behavior change based on the crowd that we're hanging out with? It's kind of a long story, so I'm going to get right into reading. This is a story from my book Ragged Museum, Untidy Stories, available through the link in the comments and on Amazon. I rather like this story. Predator among predators. When far from home, when he couldn't hunt with his own kind, Lay hunted with wolves. Every new pack presented unique political difficulties. Alphas tended not to like Lay because he was so big. He was forced to work over some of the wolves, deal some lumps, usually to the seconds of alphas, tan some hide and cool some pride. He had to make the fights quick, or he'd never hunt. Alack he could, but didn't like to survive through. The politics of wolves challenged him. The pack made hunting easy, and once he got into the pack, helped in a kill, they immediately accepted him, invited him to howl to bring the moon up and the next dawn closer. Then he'd be gone. When morning broke, he didn't know what wolves thought of that. He'd always presumed that the bestial mind didn't hold such memories for any length of time. Maybe, though. Maybe a story hung in the long song about a wolf who arrived and hunted for only one night when the moon was biggest, then disappeared. Just for one night a month. Lay wasn't sure what caused the failing. It was something about being so far from his homeland. He could only turn when the moon shined her brightest. In the bright early morning, Lay walked barefoot through the snow into the little campsite where his crew was. Including him, their group was 4, so it wasn't quite a band, not even a posse. Lay didn't think any impressive word could apply, least of all to these cads. They all sat awake. They all woke with the dawn. All 3 were men of low stature, stocky but not fat, quicker than most would judge them to be, and a good deal shorter than 6 feet. All 3 wore their hair quite short, and Camden kept his head shaved, which set him apart. On cold days, like today, he wore a leather and fur cap. They spoke with coarse accents, quick talking and swallowing the ends of words. But what when they drank it, like, wasn't there bits of dead skin and all floating about in it? Camden said, sounding confused. Camden talked the most. Dunno, mate, that's just what I heard, like. Must have been a bit shocking. Hacklight said. Hacklight seemed to think the most out of the three. He was wrapped up in a lot of their most recent haul of pelts and was smoking a long pipe, and had on the crooked, almost in-pain smile he always had on. Yeah, and the head on the stuff must have tickled something nasty in the nethers, Camden said, and all three of them guffawed. The third of them, Shinbone, he was stirring whatever it was that they were cooking for breakfast. He often cooked. He spoke less than either of them. Shinbone caught sight of Lay and nodded to him, glancing at Camden, then back to Lay, so Camden would know too. "Hello, lad," Camden said. He pulled half a loaf of bread out of the bag next to him and tossed it to Lay. "Every month comes back into camp, barefoot and all," Hacklight muttered, clunking around in a box holding camping gear. He caught out a tankard and started knocking it against his thigh to get dust out. He walked toward their little cart. "Drinks some ale, sleeps all the morning away. Oh, shut it, Hacklight," Camden said. But like he'd said it before, no one took it too mindfully. Hacklight took the foaming tankard and handed it to Lay. Lay nodded, his thanks, then coughed a few times, still had the gamey, bloody taste in his throat. "Know what?" Shinbone said. "Lady like that, will she ever take her clothes off enough for there to even be taking a bath?" The lads guffawed again. Lay curled up in a blanket on a dry patch of ground in the toes of an old oak tree, and finished his bread and ale, falling slowly asleep. He smiled a little. "Right. So I don't disagree that folk try and save back what they think is coming from miracles," Camden was saying. "But we're talking beer. Ain't much a way to save that." "But relics, they saving bits of folk all the time," Hacklight said. "You got it?" he asked Shinbone, who was pulling the cart. Their donkey had recently died. Shinbone nodded and kept trudging along in the muddy road through the trees. "Anyway, bits of folk ain't what could be called easily preserved, but you keep them someplace if you want to, So you're purposing that folk would get beer from heaven and not drink it?" Camden looked thoughtful. "It's folk do deranged this and that as go into religion. Them sort perform miraculous works anyhow." "Nah, something amuck with the idea of not drinking it. Here we are. Come on, Lay. Give us a hand." Lay and Camden got on the crossbar wood they'd nailed onto the shafts of the cart and heaved it up the bit of hill into the edge of town. Once past the first couple of houses, they left it back to Shinbone, because the roads in this town were well cobbled. They shuffled through the already mussed-around snow on into the town centre. The cart rattled into the town square. It had a large stone pillar on a plinth in the middle of it. The pillar was etched and carved and set about with all manner of native symbols. It was a standing stone from the days before stories remembered where the truth came from. Hacklight sat on the steps up to the plinth, and he lit his pipe. Camden and Shinbone began unpacking the pelts to sell. Dogs started running up to sniff Lay. Dogs liked Lay, and Lay liked dogs. He identified with the creatures. Dogs among men. He scratched them around the ears, growled and yipped with them, and smiled at their eyes. Because the dogs came close to Lay, tall with his thick, dirty fingernails, sharp and yellow, and his slick black hair, and his caged smile, cryptic and hidden when humans looked, and many teeth. Because the dogs liked Lay, children also always thought he must be all right. The first time they saw him, children tried to talk to him. The second time they never did. The second time they always kept their distance. This was the second time he'd come to town. Someone from the town, sucking on a wad in his cheek and occasionally spitting black from under his graying mustache, came up to Camden. "I ain't seen you before, mate. Good morning," Camden said. "These furs poached?" the man asked in a tone that said he still might buy some. "Cannot hunt furs in these parts without a king's mark." Camden smiled, tapping his nose. "They're cheap from us, mate. Won't get a better deal. And how much furring are you allowed to do anyhow, Can turn a profit off of these minks and similar." Camden was good at selling things. He could sell most things to most people and had lived a life to prove it. Kept it so Lay didn't have to talk much. He liked it that way. The dogs understood him. Lay paid less attention to the conversation and crouched down to growl and ruffle among the dogs. One hound was missing. They hadn't noticed at first, but now couldn't find the hound. A big hound, grey. "There's a hound missing," he said. "Aye, we've been losing them now and then," the man with the moustache said, spitting. "There's talk might be a bear around in East Ending." "Ah, say ye that?" Camden said, smiling. "Now don't get too many funny ideas, man," the man with the moustache started. Lay didn't mind. The dogs understood him. The snow moon rose. It was Lay's 4th month in this area. He'd never been so long anywhere outside his family's hunting grounds. Something new happened. Lay hunted with a pack of wolves that he had hunted with before. The alpha recognized him, an old grey with an eye that nigh glowed in the dark. Bright Eyes looked toward Lay's scent before Lay came anywhere near any of the pack could see him. And when Lay came out of the trees, he saw the alpha, standing on a rock with the stars shining on him, and looked into his eyes. As ever happened, the Bright Eyes second came herring from the side, growling, a smoke-colored one with smoldering eyes. Smoky wasn't biggest, but he was hearty. Another one came, a big pup, pale and ornery. Big Pup had been trouble when he and Lay had tangled, back when Lay said hello. Lay raised his heckles and stepped forward onto his toe. He braced. Big Pup would have a good run on him. Lay always let the wolves take the first crack. They always did. Then they got to feel bold, and Lay got to feel their strength. It made them happy to feel bold, and Lay got to stay alive. A sharp bark from Bright Eyes, and Smoky drew up short, darting a look back at Bright Eyes, then at Lay. Smoky kept his big shoulders down. Big Pup didn't heed the command. He may not have heard it. Smoky halted. Big Pup rushed past him. Bright Eyes barked again, another yap, and Smoky leapt sideways, tackling Big Pup and muscling him to the ground. Smoky held Big Pup by the scruff, his jaws wide on Big Pup's neck. Tight, but not cutting tight, just threatening tight. Big Pup whimpered and didn't struggle. Bright Eyes stood for a moment, looking on. Lay caught his eye, then took half a step back. Bright Eyes padded down from his rock, the others of his pack coming not too close but in sight. Then the old grey alpha padded through the snow toward Lay. He paused next to Smoky and Big Pup. Big Pup didn't struggle anymore, but Smoky still held him down. The alpha stared down at Big Pup. After a long, warm minute, Big Pup looked back. They locked eyes. Then Big Pup twisted and tried to get out of Smoky's jaws. Smoky let him go, but not without snapping at his nose. Close enough to say hello, then Smoky looked away. Neither Smoky nor Bright Eyes watched Big Pup pad away to the far back of the pack, ducking his head back and forth and watching Lay. Lay stared at him for a while, then met Bright Eyes' calm gaze. Bright Eyes huffed, almost a breath more than a bark. He turned away, jogging out of the clearing. The pack followed. Smoky looked at Lay, started to follow Bright Eyes, and stopped, looking back at Lay, inviting Lay to follow. So Lay did, and they hunted. For long hours they stalked a bull elk. Near a running stream they brought him down, and he howled and galled at them until he died, falling into the cold water. Lay helped tug the kill into the shallows near the edge of the stream. Then, observing the hierarchical procedures that his people and the wolves shared, he stepped back. He waited with the bachelors to eat. Then Bright Eyes did something strange. He chased off all his wolves, sometimes violently, because some of the younger wolves didn't seem to understand. When they were all chased off, Bright Eyes looked at Lay and backed away. Lay hesitated. After a moment, when all the wolves looked at him, seeming to understand something that he didn't, Lay approached. He approached the elk and ripped off a few bites. He looked at Bright Eyes, and the normal hierarchical eating resumed. Bright Eyes tore in next to Lay. Something new had happened. Lay didn't mind new things. Inside he smiled. Lay listened closely to the wolves howling at the moon after that. He recognized the singing from Bright Eyes, Smokey, and their pack. "Cool, ever heard such a holler?" Camden said, looking around in the sky, the harrowing song of the wolves coming from all directions in the distance. The lads sat near the fire, the cold night at bay outside its flickering glow. They glanced sometimes at the 3/4 moon, stared around at the stars, and tried to keep from shivering. A bit away from them, Lay sat against a tree wrapped in a thick blanket. The lads never feared wolves, not with Lay around. Those songs shivered any bones, though. "Reminds me of your land, lad." Hacklight nodded toward Lay, blowing a bit of smoke around his pipe. "Can you twig on them?" Shinbone asked. "Nah, I know you don't know the words, but what manner of song be they wolves sungin'? Can you ken the mood?" "Sounds right frightful to these ears," Camden said. Lay considered. He recognized a fair few of the voices. Some of the new ones piped up. Some were quite distant. The lads waited quietly. "It's a wandering lay," he said. "A hymn. Hearkening. Religious." "Nah," Camden said. "Dogs has religion?" Lay shrugged. Camden shook his head disbelievingly. "Nah, that the lad cannot know for blain sure," Hacklight said, gesturing with his pipe. "Dogs, not even wolves, don't reason same as folks." "Right, but it's as Shin asks, right? Lad can twig on the mood of the piece." "Wolving choir," Shinbone said, smiling but then shivering. "Now there's an uncouth prescription," Camden said, smiling as well. "Concert where you as the audience ends as the intermission feast." "Oh, aye, festal audience, sprinkled with sage and nettles, no doubt," Hacklight said. "'Tis well bespoke upper crusters as wear herbs and seasonings in their head dressings." The worm moon rose. There is no tragedy among wolves. They lead uncomplicated lives filled with running and death and moving on from things. The snow still lay in all the northerly sides of trees and rocks and hills, where the shade during the day kept it from melting. The nights were thick with cold fog. New grass started putting a wet smell into the dark. Lay padded into a dip in a hill. There was a den near the bottom. A different pack, not Bright Eye's pack, but one Lay hunted with before, lived here. The wolves stood and lay and sat in the leaves in the hollow, and they all looked at him. None of them challenged him. The alpha of his pack was a slim and dark wolf, or had been when Lay had been with them last. That wolf, though, wasn't to be seen, and the respectful body language usually afforded an alpha by the rest of the pack was being shown to a great white wolf. Drift, Lade called him, on account of his trick of jumping out of a snowbank. Lay's eyes were drawn to him. That's how the body language worked. Any who had eyes to see would have their gaze directed to Drift. This was the way of the pack. The great white Drift looked at Lay, then turned away and walked around out of sight behind a boulder. Lay followed. In a bed of leaves, the old alpha's body lay. Sly One. His body was crumpled and awkward, bloody, his side ripped half off. Something unfriendly had killed him. Bigger than a bear. The pack could handle a bear. Nearly all wolf packs could. Bears knew it and left the wolves alone. Bigger than a bear. Lay looked at Drift. Drift ducked his head at Sly One's body and looked at Lay. Wolves didn't have tragedy. That was one of man's few beautiful inventions, and one Lay embraced. This was not a tragedy. It was, however, an attack. Alphas. Wolves need alphas. Sly One had died here. The ground had been roughed and scrabbled, losing pride before dying. It had some effect on the wolves, made Lay's heart tight. He gnawed and worried at the scruff of the old alpha's neck until he had a grip on it, then started to drag. The wolves all followed at a distance, never coming to help. They watched, close as pups, learning to stalk. It took most of the rest of the night. Lay dragged Sly One until he reached the top of a bald hill he knew of nearby. There he raised his howl in a new song. He sang Sly One's name. None mourned the wolves. No one remembered them. Wolves had no claim to immortality. Now, though Sly One would live on, his pack raised their high, long voices, more biting than the wind, that sound that slides into the cracks in the soul, taking hold and shakes. Far away, wolves took up this new song, sending echoes back. The moon shined down. The song flew high. The sky broke into shivers. Lay filled their new song with memories of Sly One, and he told them not to forget. Sing this remembering song. Sing it for Sly One. Sing it for your pups. Sing it for your hunters. The moon will remember us all if we remember to sing. The hunt that night was fast, frenzied, and fruitless. Lay crawled back to camp hungry. The storm moon rose, but the night was clouded and windy. When Lay found Drift and his pack, they had already brought down a half-eaten mule deer. They made way and let Lay eat his fill, then hastily all finished what they could. After, Drift came and bobbed his head to Lay, then loped off into the woods. Lay followed. They weren't hunting. The trek was quite long and quite pointed. Drift had a destination in mind. They made their way over hills toward mountains. They got among them. The slopes rushed up on either side. They ran into a valley. Then the pack started slowing, or started showing some nerves. The trees stayed thick, so the pack more or less had cover from the wind. The whipping and cracking of the branches and the gusting made a lot of noise, though, and for a while Lay didn't hear the growling. All the pack, except Drift and a couple older wolves, growled. He saw one, and her hair was all on end, her ears down, and her head held low to the ground. All of them were the same, and falling behind Drift and Lay and the two others. Eventually they came to a point when everyone hesitated. The wind carried a new smell, something gray, moldy, and regurgitated. Cud, but meaty. It made the already edgy Drift turn and yap at them. His Beck, a female wolf just a little less important than the pack's second, set them walking again. She snapped and snarled at the heels of the pack, making a good show of hiding her nerves. She was a dusty-colored bitch, and they called her Sunrise. After another 50 yards, the smell filled all the air. The pack slowed. Drift, aided by one of the two older wolves, snapped and swiped at a couple of the pack. No amount of love-tapping and growling and shouting made any of the wolves move. Drift gave in with a harsh bark. He led Lay and the two older wolves forward. The smell was a bestial clot. It soaked into things the way dirt smells, like all matters that decompose to make it. More bestial than elk, more than bears, more evil than the gross sedentary smell of a great herd of cattle. Not as vast as cattle, all but kept close together, and not wild, but cloying as that. Plus a smell like rotting steak. It made Lay snuff. It had a thoughtless grossness as well, of a sort similar to the smells of human settlements. The mere fact of settling tended to bring an old reek, the unnatural except for those who fought against nature to create their space to live. The wolves walked through the bracken and kept low. They came to a stop to the top of a bank of tall grassy stones, which interrupted the forest. The wind blew fiercer here. Drift left on top of the stones. In a few steps, a gust of wind blew a noise of grinding and chewing to Lay. A gust of wind rushed the smell into his face, blood and half-digested greenery and feces. After a bend in the way, they saw beyond some rocks. There was an empty space up against a rock face. The darkness was thick there. Lay couldn't see much. What he did see moved. It was a big, dense shadow, something eating something that smelled like a hound. The wind shifted, blew from behind Lay and the wolves. The shadow turned its head toward them, and Lay saw the silhouette of two horns. They arched wide from a broad head. It raised in its hand the leg of a hound, maybe with a mind to strike, maybe it wasn't even that smart. Lay knew what it was. It made his hair stand up. He'd never heard of any this far west. Drift and the other wolves were already retreating. Lay followed them. He had much to think about.
"Listen, Lay, mate, you can't shift them, right?" Camden said back at camp. "Not because no one will buy them, plenty will market. Nah, it's illegal to kill them. These parts, leastways. Protected species, like," Hacklight said, nodding. "We ken they killing your matey pups, but ain't not folk bureaucratitional and gives a tick much that way." "Bureaucrats are cat people," Shinbone muttered, smiling to himself. "Right, and they pussies what eat your balls," Camden said. "Metaphorically speaking," Hacklight interrupted. "What's it?" Camden said. "Means a sort of pretend symbolic like. Right, what's it speaking, bureaucrats eat your balls. It ain't possessing of enough balls to sacrifice. I ain't possessing of enough balls to sacrifice a few to patronize with the, what's the word?" Camden gestured floppily in the air, looking over at Hacklight. "Flowery talk for mutts and things." "Canis lupi?" Hacklight suggested, sneezing, then getting his pipe out. "Maybe them. Anyhow, lad, you see what's like, right?" Lay, frowning, looked Camden hard in the eye. Camden was unyielding. Lay took a deep breath, then sighed, and nodded. He rolled into his blanket with his loaf of bread and tankard of ale. Camden nodded as well, setting his chin. He had an air of accomplishment about him. He sat on a log near the fire. Hacklight, sitting on the ground, lit his pipe off a coal out of the fire. Shinbone stirred the frying pan. The frying pan sizzled. "What's it like speaking, though?" Lay said, and let it hang. "Oh, aye, what's it like speaking, most profitable. We be quit of this land, though. Have to head for hundreds of miles." Lay nodded. He rolled over and was smiling, but didn't let the others see. Two nights before the hare moon, Lay went and stood on a hill and watched the nearly full moon rise in the gloaming, and he listened to the wolves singing. They were singing his song. It made him ache, curled his guts and tightened his throat. He hadn't been able to eat for 2 days. Tomorrow he would force himself to eat something. The day after, the evening rather, he would start his venture. It had a slim to nothing chance of working, because socially open-minded to other wolves is one thing wolves aren't. Not cannibals, but they don't have any problem killing others if they think there's a good reason. A good reason like smelling one another nearby. Lay scratched at the dry earth on his patch of ground with his bare toe. It still retained warmth from the sun and felt lovely and grainy in the creases of his skin. He breathed out a long, trembling breath and closed his eyes, listening to the song he had taught the wolves to let his sickening wrath simmer, boiling his guts. The hare moon rose. Even before it had, for he imagined his labors would take all of the night, Lay left camp. When the sun was still up, he started walking and started sniffing for wolves. He wanted Bright Eyes first. Bright Eyes felt right for the job. When the moon had come out, Lay fell to his paws. He changed into his fur. The popping and grinding hurt him. It hurt to change. He growled and cursed, then just growled, then made no sounds except to breathe hoarsely.
He was always out of breath for a few moments after. As soon as he could, he groaned to his feet, following his now far increased sense of smell, jogging toward the territory of Bright Eyes and his pack. Soon he crossed familiar smells. Big Pup, a young reddish wolf, eventually the rest. But they were aged variously and crisscrossed. He ignored the first few, but when he found a trail that smelled newer than a day, he turned onto it and broke into a hard run. Carelessly, unhurried, like a human, not a wolf, he watched for signs that hunters might follow to find quarry. Scraped bark, broken branches, deer paths recently trodden fresh stool. He saw some signs and sniffed for others more telling. The signs of deer grew more distinct, but the trail of the pack faded. With growing frustration, his hackles began to rise. Lay followed the scent at a slower run. When it had not even nearly disappeared, Lay turned off it, frustrated, reacting impulsively and on instinct. He turned deeper into Bright Eye's territory and ran, listening for water. The wolves would make regular visits to water, leaving regular trails. He soon picked up a new scent, of Bright Eyes, this one newer than the last by some hours. Lay gave a little bark and ran along it. For a while he ran without turning except to bank around trees. He hustled up a hill. As he reached the crest of it, he smelled a fresh kill. When he got to the top of it, he howled. Bright Eyes looked up at him from near his pack. They stood scattered among the trees. Lay padded down toward the pack. They, for the most part, waited for him, except for Big Pup and a skinny brown wolf who hurried to sniff Lay's face and neck, then circle him and escort him to the kill. Politely, Lay took a couple of bites. Then he went to Bright Eyes and stared into his eyes. Bright Eyes looked away after a moment and woofed. Lay turned away and began to run. The pack followed him. None of them hesitated until they started to smell great white. Skinny and some of the old curs held back, but Lay turned on them, yapping. He bared his teeth at them, lowering his stance for a fight. They took the hint, the whole pack, and went past him, and he backed around them, keeping an easy distance for pouncing. When they'd all got in ahead of him, he fell in behind and started chasing them. They understood. This was the wolf's world, a world ruled by the hard, ruled by the cunning, ruled by hierarchy based only on who can kill you. Fall in line or die is the only law of their world. They trust it. They ran in silence, nervous but trusting Lay. Lay was nervous too. He didn't let himself wonder how he was going to find Great White. Didn't think how he'd communicate to unreasoning beasts their necessary purpose. Didn't think how he'd keep them from tangling each other to stew as soon as they saw each other. If they saw each other. He didn't think about that. Running felt good. Lay forgot things when he ran, felt more like a wolf than ever when he let loose and herred to his limits. His mind receded and his instincts welled up, pushing out his thoughts. He saw the world for more than it appeared to be. He knew what it was and didn't need to see. Stone, moss, mist, decaying earth, feeding new earth. A world of senses. It knew what it was. If he let go to it, he did too. Following himself, he turned his head slightly. He wove around trees. The wolves splashed through streams and over the next hill. Great White's pack ran parallel. Lay slowed. Bright Eyes smelled Great White. The wolves with Lay all did. They growled and raised the hair on their backs. Lay shouted at them and followed him, taking all the wolves by surprise. Lay brought them together. They all began to bark and howl and yap, posturing, scratching the ground. The alphas of each pack went to the forefront. Great White began pacing in front of his wolves, watching Bright Eyes. Bright Eyes stared right back, not moving, looking but not smelling calm. Big Pup came to stand next to Lay, seeming arrogant and wanting to show that Lay was on their side, not with Great White. Lay, though, huffed at Big Pup, then walked over to Bright Eyes, who turned his head, not his eyes. Those Bright Eyes kept on Great White, to Lay. With his snout, Lay nudged Bright Eyes a couple of times in the face, just to communicate his loyalty. Bright Eyes seemed to understand, or at least to be trying to. Slowly, with both packs making all their noise on either side, Lay walked to Great White, met his eyes. Great White seemed curious. He was intelligent. Lay circled around behind him, standing a little back and to the left, about where a second might, and looked at Bright Eyes. Bright Eyes lowered his head, narrowed his eyes, and woofed. Might work, Lay's mind thought. Big Pup's friend, the young red wolf, jumped forward, hot-blooded, ready to tangle. Two of Great White's wolves took a few steps, knowing their place. The young red wolf didn't make it. Bright Eyes pounced on her, jawing her down to the ground by the neck. The wolves that noticed it went silent. Wolves from both packs warily calming and falling still. The first to do so were the wolves from Great White's pack that she had originally been reacting to, who seemed almost frightened and certainly confused and backed away. Bright Eyes was an old and thin wolf, and it took him a spell of time to subdue the red, who was too surprised to just lie out. She couldn't get away. Bright Eyes had her. It took a little time. All the wolves watched her struggle, and eventually the only noise under the moon came from her, and the only movement was her rolling against the leaves, embarrassed. She stilled, conscious all the world she'd ever known was staring at her. Bright Eyes held on to her for a while, even after she'd stopped struggling, just to make sure. Before letting her go, he wrenched his jaw slightly on her neck, just to tell her that he didn't like it. He let go and turned away from her, and she stayed lying there, her chin on the ground, waiting. Bright Eyes had all the power now. He'd done something incredible, something that all the instinct in all the wolves didn't understand. But they'd learned Lay's song. That was something. Lay waited, standing slightly back of Great White, watching. Bright Eyes looked at Great White, then at Lay. Then he turned to Big Pup, wuffing. Big Pup snorted back, shook his shoulders, trying to hide the fact that his hackles were on end, that his knees were trembling slightly. Then Big Pup walked forward, passing the wolves that the red wolf had been leaping to attack, and Big Pup went up right in front of Great White. Lay caught his breath. The night caught its breath. The moon watched. Big Pup shook his head, not meaning anything by it, just loosening his neck. He turned half away from Great White, then rolled onto his back, his feet up in the air. Lay had never seen a wolf do that before. It was stupid. It was impossibly stupid. The easiest way to get gored was to do that. Wolves didn't expose their bellies to their own mothers once they'd come of age anyway. Big Pup was the biggest dog around. Everyone for hundreds of miles knew that. He would probably even have, with a little luck, taken Great White for a surprise upset. Great White was tempted. Less big dogs around meant wider hunting for him. Then Great White glanced back at Lay, then huffed and turned away from Big Pup. Lay barked. It was done. They all looked at him. He was trembling from adrenaline. He wanted to smile but growled instead. He had a wider register for growling than wolves. It impressed them. Wolves like new sounds. He curled the knuckles of his front paws under, flexing to release the tension, and he hopped a couple of times in his excitement before taking off at a run in the direction he wanted to go. The wolves began after him, barking and yipping and drafting off his excitement. For now he was their alpha. Alpha of wolves doing the improbable. They didn't hesitate when they started to smell the beast. Too much peculiarity in their lives right then made them incautious and trusting. They caught the hunting instinct, however, and when the scent became strong and clear, they fanned out, the heavier wolves getting on the outside to be flankers. The Nagas, quick wolves and hard, who could dart out and take advantage of softened defenses. Bright Eyes and some of the harder wolves stayed at the center of the group to back up the lighter, quicker, younger ones who would go in first to rakes into the ravine leading to the creature's lair. Lay lost sight of them for a time. He turned left between the Nagas and left flankers. He padded to the edge of the ravine to look on and see how it would start. The rakes had got to a place where the ravine flattened and widened out, strewn with bones, mostly eaten carcasses, and a hollow on one side under an overhang of rock. It was a natural hollow that the creature had clawed and dug at it to deepen it and make it a den. The place was empty, and the rakes were keeping low and treading her. Its smell soaked everything, rose from everything. The uncertainty made Lay jittery. His hackles rose. The rakes bobbed their heads back and forth, treading like the ground was treacherous, and gave unsure footing. Lay heard it first, but there wasn't much to hear. The beast fell out of the scrub at the side of the ravine, one cloven claw raising a big stick, a club. Its bovine muscle was crusty with blood and snot, and its long horns, arching from either side of its head, caught leaves and creepers from the undergrowth. It would have stood almost 9 feet tall if it weren't hunched over to swing at the rakes with its stick. The wolves shied away for a second, shocked, scared. After a moment they recovered themselves, biting at it, snapping at its heels and flanks. The beast kicked at them with its hoofed hind legs, swinging wildly with its stick, stunning the young reds. She gave out a yip and fell to the ground. The other rakes drew back, giving the beast more space, giving themselves more range to maneuver. Bellowing again, the beast moved on them. That was when Bright Eyes and his wave, the Nagas, ran in from the side, howling and barking. 4 wolves, Bright Eyes in the front, leapt on the beast, sinking their teeth into it. They climbed toward its snarling head. The beast dropped its stick to reach at them. Bellowing, it tried to rip Bright Eyes off. But it couldn't. It fell on purpose, trying to get the wolves under it. Bright Eyes and another leapt off, but a few wolves were caught under its weight. They yipped, dodging. Still, some of the Minotaur's flailing weight landed on them. Crawling on all fours, the beast made some distance away from the wolves. He, by the thick smell, tried to put its back against the wall of its den. Big Pup jumped down at it then. The beast howled, turned, and tried to escape. The other flankers met it. Left with only one avenue, the beast ran, loping on all its legs. Fast, but not faster than the wolves. Great White howled. Bright Eyes howled. Big Pup howled. Lay wanted to laugh. It was time to chase. They knew what they were when they chased. Lay knew things that ran faster than wolves. He chased them and lost, raced them and lost. But nothing ran for longer than a pack of wolves. Not even Lay's own people, because they possessed the capacity for pity and the flaw of doubt. Silently, the wolves ran. The beast couldn't flee. That would imply it had any control. It was being herded. Not herded in any direction, simply kept going. The heat of its strain broadened its stench, and its sweat wet the ground it thumped across. It stumbled, tripping on its hooves, howling like a mouthful of gravel. Its elbows kicked up dead leaves. Blood dripped out of its nose, pinking the froth of its mouth. Its eyelashes clung together at the corners of its eyes. It couldn't run any more. Panting, it turned to the wolves. They slowed, circled it round, now on firm footing, sure of themselves and calm. The beast watched them, its jaw slack and its shoulders limp. Desperation, a man-like rebellion was in that beast. It gave a loud howl, bleeding spittle spattering the ground. The wolves began pouncing on it. It reckoned for itself, lashing out savagely against them. It gouged at them, kicked at them, caught them, and bit them. The wolves got on its back, and it fell on them, howling. It got up, but they bit its legs. It limped away, but they cut it off, snapping and barking. Finally it reared up, grasping the nearest wolf, the life gone from its eyes, but its voice the louder for the breaking the scream could make of its throat. It hoisted the wolf over its head, squeezing life from its throat and breaking its back. The pack leapt at its exposed belly, ripped at its legs and arms and pulled it down, tearing at its throat. But it had died. Dawn yellowed the treetops. Wolves have understood that man is a different animal from other animals. Softer, easier to hunt, but somehow more numerous. They are noisy creatures and unnatural smelling, but cunning. Wolves don't fear a man, but they are wary of mankind. They hadn't seen Lay become a man. They'd been preoccupied while he softened and stood, while the sun rose. They saw his shape now. He squatted, staring at them, scratching his chin. His scent was the same. That's why he hadn't been attacked. They laid more stock in that aroma than in his shape. They had divided into their packs, and their packs stood a distance away from each other, all staring back at Lay. He saw that they weren't angry. That comforted him. They weren't about to jump on him. If they did, he could last for a few minutes, of that he was certain. What he had no certainty about was whether he would even try to fight them if they attacked. He might just let them kill him. The situation had fallen out of his hands. That could not be denied. Every mode of crude wolfish communication required a wolf's body, a wolf's voice. He had neither. He could only wait. While he did, he looked at the carcass of the beast, laying out crooked in the madly scratched and disturbed earth where the tangle happened. Around him were 3 dead wolves. One big one lay near the beast's claw, a russet blondish wolf with broad shoulders. Cautiously, keeping an eye on the packs, Lay stood. He walked over to the dead wolf. It was Pup. Big Pup. He lay half on his back, his hind legs in the air, his tongue lolling out. Lay frowned, a hard and uncontrollable frown. He bent, dragged Pup away from the beast's mouth, and crouched to scoop the dog in his arms. Bright Eyes barked, then began to sing. He sang Lay's song. His pack chimed in. Then Great White sang, and his pack did too. To his man's ears, now with those wolves on all sides, the song sounded made of teeth and inexorable avalanches of stones, of frostbite and of the ghosts our minds make out of wind. It nearly scared him. His people weren't wolves, and the way wolves sing twangs against a human spine like a badly tuned tremble. Lay wasn't wholly human, so it wasn't so bad for him. It still made his soul shiver. He knew the words to his song, though. It was a good song, even if it scared him. Getting the head of the beast proved a bit of an adventure. With the help of a big jagged rock 2 hours later, he walked into camp, still naked, dragging the head by one of its arched horns. "Ah, no," Campton said indignantly, seeing the trophy with the leaves and the soil plastered into the blood and snot. He gaped crookedly, but Hacklight grinned around his pipe. Shinbone, who was already standing near the cart, didn't respond except to fill a tankard with ale and bring it to Lay. "Do you see?" Camden said, pointing vaguely at the head and looking at Hacklight. Hacklight, at the look on Camden's face and his general indignation, began to laugh. "What in Maria's larder is funny?" "Just one of them mornings, I suppose," Hacklight said. "God, why have there got to be them mornings?" Hacklight shrugged. His pelts around his shoulders. He stood up and poured a pitcher of water over the coals of the fire. They smoked and sizzled. He stacked the pitcher with the pans they'd eaten breakfast out of. "What are you doing, like?" Camden said. "You're never packing away at camp." "Is," Shinbone said.
Hacklight corrected. Am, Lay said, lowering the now half-empty tankard with all... They all looked at him with varied levels of resigned fundamental misunderstanding. Fine, packing up camp, that's what we'll do then, Camden said. Lord, what we do for mine, like. The next time we find somewhere's nice and got relative weather and not embarrassingly curious people, can we try not to break the law? Please? You're a good man, Camden. Lay clapped him on the shoulder and went to the car to set down his tankard and get out some breeches. What the hell is your definition of a good man, eh? Camden said. The human race hasn't a chance if you're deciding the standard. Oh, I forgot to tell us we need to take a deep breath at the beginning. Sorry. That's a very melodramatic story. I haven't read it as much as some of the other ones. Yes. So there you go. Those are my thoughts. That's the thing that I have read to you. It's a story that's about werewolves and about changing your skin from one social situation to another one. It was from my book, Ragged Museum. Yeah, I feel like it was fairly melodramatic. I mean, I guess you're right. It's more important what other people... See, this is the thing. Meaning is, I think that meaning is achieved by people who read stories, not by the writer. I can put in as much as I want, but ultimately, meaning is a relationship that it comes from a relationship of a reader between a reader and a story, not between a writer and the story as much. So, what other people think of it is a little bit more significant than what I think of it. That's what I think about stories in general. What a place with werewolves and minotaurs. Death of the artist. Sort of. I mean, the artist has to be there doing things, but it's... My views of the story are ever so slightly less important than the views of the people who read it. That's what I think. Good old times, book are better. So, there you go. I'm very pleased to have read to you again. This one's a very exhausting one for me to read, partly because it's so dramatic, and partly because it's just so full of things. I know that there's a very confusing part in the middle there where I had to write dialogue without words and explain how the wolves were communicating together, and it was very difficult, and I'm really glad that I got through it. So, thank you for your time and attention. I had a good time. I might not be able to read to y'all next Thursday because I'm taking a bit of adventure into the mountains. So, not this coming Thursday, but the Thursday after, I shall read another story. And it should be good. Some good coin for the trophy since 3 wolves had to die for it. I agree completely. Yes, it was an expensively bought trophy. So, there you go. Y'all stay warm this evening and this weekend. And safe. And remember that, remember how important it is to sing remembering songs. Today's evening was brought to you by Mulled Wine. Alright, we'll talk again soon. Y'all are very welcome.